So the bolts are off now, they've been undone, and we're going to take the top bridges, cam bridges off, and obviously we'll have to strip, take the first opening shims, and then to go to the, because opening shims they're all fine, bike has only 15,000 miles, so we're gonna only replace shims on the closing, which they are harder to do, I would say. So after removing bolts, we have to take the sort of the bridges off. So what I'm using two like you know, Allen bolts screwed in instead of rocker cover bolts, so they help me to not obviously to use screwdriver or anything silly like that, so they should come off quite easy. So that's the first one, and here goes the second one. It's a bit more stubborn because probably it's a sealant from the, there you go, off. And now it's always worth it to remember which camshaft, because it's quite easy to confuse, but then you still have the markings here because they look very similar, but they will not work correctly. I never heard of anyone swap them and then had the engine running, but obviously it's very important, inlet and exhaust cam. Right, so the cams are off, and now we have to take the small shims out first to get to the bottom shim, obviously, and then we see what size it is. We have to do some maths, count, and then choose the correct one. So the clearances should be as factory recommends. So I'm starting from inlet right valve. So basically we have to get the spring off. I'm not sure you can see it on the video, but there is a spring which holds the opening rocker always in place. I mean, it's there, obviously you have to take it off first because otherwise you won't be able to slide the shim off. So I've got the tool and just basically pop off, and now obviously the rocker goes down, and as you can see you have access to the collets. Right, I always use a magnet to remove those little bastards because magnet always will catch them. They will not fall into the engine, so I use a strong magnet, and there you go, two of them on. So now we can slide off the shim itself. Okay, and the shim is, I'm not sure you can see, it's a 305, I'm not sure, there you go, 305 shim. So we have to fit slightly thicker, which we need to put thicker about 315, and that should be correct tolerance for this valve. Okay, so the correct shim is on the valve now. That red stuff on there, it's a grease, it's a normal grease. The reason why I always add grease because those little collets, they are always very happy to not to stick to the valve and just fall somewhere in deep or even inside the engine. So I always use a bit of a help of the grease. So once you just touch the little bit of, you know, to the grease, the collet will stuck to it and it will not fall down. I just found it really helpful if you use grease for the collets. As you can see now, the collets are on and they stuck into the grease, so they not falling down. So what I do, I'm going to lift the rocker a little bit just to make sure. I know it's a bit difficult, but obviously now there you go. You see it has to be almost flat with the valve, the shim, because if it's any abnormal or sort of position, if the valves stick out more than you can sort of see, obviously they're not engaged, so the shim is not fully in, and when you put the cam in, you're not going to be able to turn the cam or even tighten the bridges with the cam bridges, and you can damage the engine or head. So now obviously you can see the shim, both shims are on the place, and spring is on. The valve itself, as you can see here, I've put it on purely because to keep obviously the rocker creating some force on the shim, therefore obviously the collars will not fall out and everything is in one place. I strongly suggest obviously always to check whichever cylinder you're working on, to put the engine on TDC. So if the piston is on the highest point, then obviously even if by mistake the valve will drop in slightly, you know it's not going to go all the way down. It will just only drop about 10-15 millimeters max, so you always have enough valve sticking out, so you can always use the pliers or magnet to lift the valve and put everything together.